When my professor in college first taught this form to me, he didn't have any kind of name. However, for the sake of making this easier to remember, I gave the format a name, the star. This name should make it easy for you to remember because a star has 5 points. And this format also has 5 points. You can use this format in almost every kind of writing, even fiction and poetry. Yes, if you understand this format deeply, you will begin to realize it is not as much a writing format as it is a psychological format for structuring ideas. In the past, this kind of format has been mistakenly understood as the argumentative essay. And teachers have taught if you don't desire to have an argument, you shouldn't necessarily use this format. Furthermore, as I have noticed in China, the word argument is often misunderstood as wanting to fight about something. In Chinese culture, it is rather impolite to fight about things. So, as a result, this kind of essay is rarely taught and even more rarely practiced. And this is a pity because the format is not actually about fighting, nor is it about arguing with someone. When we communicate, we are always trying to convince the person we are communicating with that our ideas are important. If you don't care that your ideas are important, why would you spend the effort to tell someone anything? You wouldn't. You would shut your mouth, listen, or maybe even walk away. You wouldn't spend the time or energy to talk to someone if you didn't feel they would be swayed or influenced by your words. So in this sense, we or you are always trying to tell others something and hoping their minds are changed because of what you are saying. This format works with the same principles. Let's look at an overview of this structure. As you can see, the format has 5, maybe 6 points, just like a star. Most successful writing starts with what we call a hook. The writing then moves into an introduction, and then after the introduction, the main points are given in a particular order. This order is usually planned out with the simplest ideas at the beginning and the most complicated ideas at the end, although the order of the ideas isn't usually as important as if the ideas are relevant or irrelevant to the main idea of the writing. Usually near the end of a piece of writing, the writer tries to appeal to the reader by talking about some ideas not discussed in the writing or ideas that go against the main idea of the writing. Then the writer will finally give a conclusion and finish the writing. Something interesting you may have already noticed by looking at this picture. All of the points in the star are surrounding the word thesis. Why is that? What is a thesis and why is it so important to writing? I used the word thesis in this model, but my professor who taught me this format used the word assertion. That is probably the better word, but it is a more complicated word, so you may not have heard it before. The word assertion means to assert something. To assert something is to make something important known to someone else. For example, if you are with your friends taking some time to relax and you feel your stomach rumble or feel empty, you may assert to your friends that you feel you all should go to the cafeteria to eat lunch. You are not trying to argue with your friend. You are just telling your friend that you believe you all should stop what you are currently doing and start walking towards the cafeteria. You are asserting that you are hungry. A thesis is the same thing as an assertion, but the word thesis is a more academic term that implies that you can succinctly describe your assertion in a single statement. For example, the thesis or assertion in this example is We have been talking in our dorm for the last 10 minutes, but now it is time to go get something to eat. You are making several statements here. First, you are saying that your conversation has gone on long enough and it is time to stop the conversation. Secondly, you are saying that it is now the time of day to eat. Thirdly, you are saying that you feel it would be better if all of you stopped what you were doing, left the dorm, and started walking toward the cafeteria. Now, you may have several reasons why you have decided to say this. For example, maybe you know that based on the amount of time it takes to get from your dorm to the cafeteria, your personal favorite dish may be gone if you wait for another 10 minutes. Or maybe you want a chance to see that cute girl or handsome guy on the sidewalk. And you know this is your only chance to do so because you know he or she is getting out of class at this time and usually walks down this road. Maybe even today you'll be brave enough to wave hello. Or maybe you'll know that the conversation in the dorm is heading in a really strange place and that one of your roommates is going to be really embarrassed in about 3 minutes. So you decide it is better you halt the conversation. Give your roommate a chance to think about how he will respond, and by the time all of you have your bags and your keys and are on the road, maybe he will have a good response, or the conversation will have shifted to that cute guy or girl walking down the sidewalk. My point is that all of our decisions have reasons why we choose to do them. Everything we do in life is an assertion. And if we think carefully enough about our decisions, we can put those decisions into words as theses. Those theses then define our lives. And once we recognize the reasons why we do certain things, we can make better decisions. I do not intend this lecture to be about personal psychology. Rather, this is to show you that personal psychology makes up everything we do, and therefore our writing is a response to that personal psychology. Once you realize how easy this is, writing becomes very, very simple. Writing is just another way to visualize our thoughts. And just like when once you realize how this basic structure defines your own life, you can use that ability to communicate your ideas easily and quickly to an audience in a way that creates understanding and definition. Now, let's review each individual section. The hook. What is a hook? You can think of a hook simply like the hook on the end of a fishing rod. You attach a hook to your fishing pole. That hook does several things. First of all, that hook has what is called a lure on it. The lure is bright. It smells good. It feels good. The fish are attracted to the lure. When the fish see the lure, they dream of how that lure might taste in their mouths. The fish have positive thoughts about how that lure might feel in its belly. The lure incites their eyes and their sensory organs, as well as their little fish brains. There is something amazing about that lure that might even bring in a huge school of fish for the opportunity for just one little nibble or glance. Once the fish grabs the lure, it discovers it cannot remove the lure. The lure is stuck in its mouth. The fish wriggle and struggle, but eventually the fisherman pulls the fishing rod up and has successfully caught the fish. This is the idea of the hook. No, I don't mean you should write a hook that literally kills your reader. That would be terrible, because then that person could never read anything you wrote ever again, as they would be in your belly. Rather, It's the principle of the catch. The hook must have a lure, and once the lure finishes its job, the hook must then grab the reader and refuse to let them go. The problem is that your reader can put down your writing at any time. The fish is literally stuck and cannot move, and the barbs of the hook are stripping their mouth of flesh, and they feel in deadly peril and pain. You don't want your reader to feel pain, and you don't want your reader to feel like if they put down your writing, they are literally going to die. Well, maybe a little. That's the magic of the hook. You attack the sensory brain power of your readers, overload them with an incredible experience, and not only do they want to finish your writing, they feel like if they don't finish your writing, they may in fact regret that action forever. So ask yourself, how are you opening your writing? Do you really want your readers to have that feeling they absolutely must finish your writing or spare themselves of their own lives? Or could you care less? Are you just writing a little piece for your professor and couldn't care less whether you did a good job? In fact, maybe you despise your readers so much that your hook is actually boring and your reader drops your writing in disgust. You never did want that person to read your writing anyway. Good riddance to them. Goodbye. And hopefully that person will never again pick up your writing for as long as he will live. Or do you desperately want to catch that fish? Do you want that creature to become magnetically attracted to your writing? Do you want that person to feel indebted to you for the rest of her life because of the amazing quality of your writing and your ideas? Are you a mindless drone of a writer and only want mindless drones reading your work? Or do you want your work to inspire the next Shakespeare, the next Lucien, or the next president of a country? When crafting your hook, you want to use sensory language, experiential knowledge, and research. Every tool at your disposal to get that reader attached to your writing so that the reader will finish your writing and come away with some kind of new idea about life. Otherwise, why are you writing? What's the point if you're not trying to alter people's minds, open them up to new possibilities, or enthrall them with experiences that will take them beyond the normal, boring life and into something magnificent? After your hook, you absolutely must immediately move into the content of your writing. The introduction is an important piece of the puzzle of your writing because you will be reviewing the main idea of your writing. Before I dive headfirst into this section, there is a necessary disclaimer that must be said before I talk about introducing your theses. Many writers mistakenly move into a piece of writing before they know the ending. This is a mistake. In narrative or expository writing, you, the writer, must know the ending before you begin writing. Why? Because the ending is the beginning, and the beginning is the ending. It ties everything together. Let's go back to that previous example I gave about the assertion that you were hungry and wanted to go to the cafeteria. When you said that, you already knew your final destination, the cafeteria, and you had some idea of why you wanted to go there. But what would have happened if you had interrupted the conversation in your dorm, suggested everyone leave the dorm, but didn't have an idea of where you wanted to go? Maybe your friends would have followed you. And then once you stepped outside, they would have looked at you and asked you, okay, where should we go? And what if you responded, I'm not sure? How do you think they would have responded to you? Some might have followed you, but most of your friends would have been annoyed with you. The same goes for writing. If you start a piece of writing without knowing the ending, then by the time you get to the ending, most of your readers will already have left. It's just common sense. You must know the ending before you begin. That's why an outline is necessary before you start writing. So, why is the introduction so important? In the introduction, you will present three core elements: a movement from your hook to your assertion or thesis, then the assertion or thesis, and finally, a brief outline of what you will be reviewing in the piece of writing. Now, some writers combine the hook with the first element, which is fine, but it's still necessary to rewind the logic of your hook back to your thesis. The two must be related intimately. In some way, the hook is an illustration of a picture of your thesis in action, or possibly an example of the danger when your thesis is not heeded or followed. Secondly, you must present your assertion or thesis. This presentation can be simple or complex, but the presentation must be obvious. You cannot delay this information being relayed to your reader under any circumstances. There is no excuse to not tell your readers what they are getting into. You must present your readers with the option to pull out after they've been hooked, or else they will be quite grumpy with you by the time they reach the end and find they disagree with your entire main idea. You should not be roundabout when delivering the assertion or thesis. If you are presenting a new theory or a new idea, you should state what that idea is. If you're presenting a vision of how to live life, you should paint that picture as evocatively as possible. If you're making a proposition for a new kind of business, you should immediately and clearly review the main idea of that new kind of business. Don't worry about your readers not really understanding how it works just yet, because you have the rest of the piece of writing to explore those strategies. If you have done a good job with your hook, then there is almost no way a reader would turn away from your writing. But there's no idea that they would turn away from. But you still need to give the reader an opportunity to turn away if desired. You must give your readers the freedom to make a choice after they finish your introduction. Thirdly, you must explain to the reader how the essay will proceed. There's a common saying in communication. Number 1, say what you're going to say. Number 2, say it. And number 3, say what you already said. The trick with this method is that each time you say this, you must say it in a new and fresh way, and each subsequent saying of it must be layered on top of the previous sayings, so that by the time you've said it the third time, you have both said the same thing 3 times, but you've also said 3 totally different things. So, as this is the first time you are going to tell the reader what you are going to say, this should be said simply, without any flavors or feelings, just a basic outline of what you are going to say. Novelists do this as well. In novels, authors have many techniques for this. For example, after the hook of a novel, the author will introduce the goal of the protagonist: find love, mend a relationship with her father, find the city of gold, or find peace in her heart. Sometimes the novelist will use advanced techniques, such as dreams, foreshadowing, or flashbacks. Sometimes the novelist will introduce characters that typify the kind of life the protagonist wants, usually in the form of a guardian or a mentor. Sometimes the novelist will even have the character taste a bit of that life and then suddenly rip that life away, giving the protagonist something to thirst for and desire. In almost every major piece of writing that has contained any amount of influence in history, that piece of writing has included these three elements: a kind of hook, a main idea, and an explanation of what was going to follow. If you were going to write, you must also include these three concepts, and over time and practice, you will improve your abilities to the point where they come naturally and smoothly from your brain through your hands. But mastering these takes time, diligence, and failure. Once you have finished your hook, thesis, and outline, in your next section, you move on to the meat of your content, your points. In the STAR model, there will be three main points. As you saw in the diagram, each point is related somehow to the thesis. Generally, each of your points supports your thesis, although this isn't necessary for all types of writing with regard to all of your points. But each point must buttress the thesis by presenting a different side of it. Each point gives you the opportunity to explore different facets, present different details, cite different evidence, and present a more three-dimensional understanding of your thesis. You must carefully select your points. They should not be loosely chosen. Imagine your piece of writing as a three-dimensional portrait. Your thesis is the conceptual framework of the art, while point 1, point 2, and point 3 represent X, Y, and Z, respectively. They are different dimensions of the framework or the main idea. Individually, none of the points represents a full image, but together, the 3 points present an image so complete that your readers feel like they could reach out and grab your idea in their bare hands. As each of your points rises in complexity, point 1 ought to be the simplest and most tangible dimension of your work. Point 1 is your starting point, the launch pad or port from which your ship sails away. It is the easiest for the reader to grasp and most directly related to your thesis. It has the most familiar evidence that your reader can understand and latch onto, and becomes a great anchor point if and when you decide to dive into the more complicated waters later. Each of your points must follow this relationship from simplicity to complexity, for reasons I will explain later in this lecture. After all, you wouldn't teach a young boy to swim by throwing him into the deep water during his first lesson, would you? He would drown. Just as throwing that little boy into the dark ocean before learning how to properly move his arms and legs would be cruel, introducing a topic to your reader without your reader being prepared is equally as cruel, and this is a good way to lose your reader's interest before you have a chance to begin. Next, the importance of evidence cannot be understated. You must present evidence for the reader to make a connection between the theoretical and the practical. For your writing, your research must be clear, perfect, and illustrative of your point. The problem that so many authors make is to come up with their points first and then try to find evidence later to support their point, rather than the other way around. There are two kinds of research: inductive research and deductive research. Deductive research is about testing existing theories. Inductive research is about developing a theory and then using pattern recognition to determine how that theory could be tested. Most writers confuse the two. For example, a writer will create their own theory about something and then use existing theories to prove her own thesis correct. This is not correct. But this is usually where writers make the biggest mistakes in using evidence. This is a little complicated, so allow me a moment to try and make this simpler. Let's go back to our original thesis about interrupting the conversation in your dorm to go to the cafeteria. It's not a strong thesis, but it's simple and it will work for our explanation. If your point number one was that you knew that if you waited too long, your favorite dish would be gone, then there are a couple of ways to prove this. The first is by doing deductive research, citing examples of how long it took other people to get from their dorms to the cafeteria, and then doing a bit of research yourself by timing yourself going from the dorm to the cafeteria. Having that evidence solidly in hand, you could make a persuasive argument that if you waited a few minutes longer, your favorite dish might be gone by the time you arrived. If you wanted to do inductive research, on the other hand, while you wouldn't be able to prove your theory correct, you could propose a theory by referring to examples of other students who constantly got out of class late and missed out on the chance to get their favorite dishes. You could then postulate a general set of ideas that certain dishes had a tendency to run out faster than other dishes, including your own favorite dish, based on the totality of experiences you investigated. Actually determining if your theory was correct, however, would require deductive reasoning and hard evidence. The mistake many writers make, however, is to state the inductive as hard evidence. In other words, you might incorrectly write that the reason your favorite dish ran out was because other students also missed out on their favorite dishes. Now, while you think that might sound ridiculous, it's actually more common than you might think. In English, bad deductive reasoning is a confusion of the two, and this is called a fallacy. I don't have time in this class to fully explore fallacies, but you might have heard of a few different kinds. Ad hominem, two wrongs make a right, straw man, red herrings, loaded questions, slippery slope, sunk cost, and many other types. The main point, before I move on though, is this. If you are using deductive reasoning, you must have hard evidence. If you are using inductive reasoning, you must not attempt to determine reality, only provide scenarios that might be true, unless you are able to back it up with deductive reasoning through a lot of hard work. There can be different kinds of evidence when writing. For example, you can use your own personal experience. You can use another person's experience. You can cite data from statistics. You can cite articles that have been published. Or you can cite other physical objects that have some validity to them. Generally, though, you need proof that such evidence does exist. Even inductive reasoning requires some kind of hard evidence for numbers to be logically consistent. Because I was an English major in college, I often used as evidence scenes or characters from the stories that we read in class. Or I might also have used historical evidence as a way of realizing the truth of those scenes and characters. Anytime I used evidence, I made sure to provide a citation to the original document, either through a footnote, parenthetical citation, or endnote. Having that kind of hard evidence allows your reader to then investigate the evidence himself and increases the reader's trust level about you. Finally, in each point, you need to conclude with a statement that bridges the current point with the next point. If you don't perform this function, then your writing will appear mechanical and dull. But if you can provide context to connect the 2 points, then you will find the reader is able to develop the idea along with you, as long as you are moving from the simple to the complex, as I stated before, you ought to do. Sometimes this is tricky. If your points aren't really related to each other, then finding a way to connect them might seem disingenuous, facile, or immature. Therefore, this is why it's so important you carefully think about what your thesis is and what your points will be, and how you will move through them. While a painter could theoretically paint a picture by painting in quadrants, the correct way to paint is to paint in layers, by layering colors on top of colors and images on top of images. The same happens with a piece of writing. You must carefully construct the piece of writing, not only for yourself, but also for your reader. Because unlike a painting, which can be discerned in a brief moment by the naked eye, a piece of writing is an experience, which is chewed, swallowed, and digested over time. And not all readers consume writing at the same speed. Therefore, you need to think carefully about the order of your piece of writing, the structure, the ideas, and determine, do they fit together or do they hurt each other? The second and third points follow the model you set with your first point, and again layer in complexity, with the third and final point being your most complex. You must determine for yourself how to proceed and order these points. You generally want your third point as the most complex because you will need all the logic and evidence of the previous points for the reader to even understand the basic definitions of your third point. This is not to say that all writing must be incredibly complex by the third point. It doesn't need to be. However, you will remember that writing tends to reflect psychology, and psychology does continue to complicate the more variables and constituent parts that are added. That is to say, even if your third point is not complicated, it will be, because your reader will already be absorbing the first 2 points before they ever reach the third. So, if your first point is too complicated, the likelihood your reader never moves beyond it and completely fails or misses your second and third point is high. I won't say too much on this topic, as I have already introduced the importance of evidence. However, the third point is unique in one other way. While the first point is connected to the second point and the second point is connected to the third point is the final point in your writing, and so does not connect with any other points. Instead, point number 3, or your final point, connects with a term called the refutation, something you may not have heard of before. I will take a little time now to talk about the refutation, that is, what it is and why it is important in your writing. The refutation does what it claims to do. It refutes. Specifically, the refutation refutes the thesis. Now, why would you want to do that? Haven't you spent most of the writing trying to support your thesis? Why give credibility to an opposing point of view? While reading your writing, your readers will constantly be generating arguments in their heads. Human creativity is vast and infinite, so for sure, you will never be able to guess or determine the exact nature of every opposing argument. Additionally, by including a refutation, would that appear more combative than necessary? Would that seem to your reader that you are trying to play on their emotions by trying to act like you are fair and balanced? In an ideal world, sure. But in reality, in the process of reading through a piece of writing, that writing actually becomes alive. For your reader, your writing gains actual sentience and intelligence. It grows and changes in their mind, and functions like any other kind of mind. Your readers will argue with your writing as much as they might argue with you. It's a nonsensical reality. Your refutation is an attempt to bring some humanity back into the discussion. For example, when arguing that you need to stop the conversation of your roommates to quickly head to the cafeteria, the refutation is an excellent place to show a bit of empathy towards your roommates. Perhaps the discussion is riveting and important, and by stopping the discussion, you may end up preventing plans for an upcoming trip to the mountains just because you were afraid your favorite dish would be gone. To some degree, that's a selfish thing to do, wouldn't you agree? Then, once you have introduced your refutation, you provide logic or proof of that. You could use the example of a previous conversation that was stopped with devastating effects. Even more powerful could be an example from another conversation with your roommates that ended up being critical to your selection of a major. Just the nature of showing your reader that you have taken the time to carefully think about opposing points of view will create endearment and support to finish your writing. However, the refutation is also another opportunity for you to showcase parallel or oppositional theories, because by doing this, you are also giving yourself an opportunity to show the validity of your thesis over those. However, this must be done delicately. Refutations must always, when expressed, show a level of empathy for oppositional or parallel ideas. You cannot be combative when reviewing other ideas, as your readers will immediately, even if they agree with you, consider you a hostile force. Therefore, you must be gentle, caring, empathetic, and supportive of other ideas, not your own, and trust that the power of your thesis will sway your readers. Therefore, at the end of your refutation, you will draw a connection, a bridge, between the refutation and your thesis, and express how they are indelibly connected. The final part of the star is the concluding section. Most writers overlook this section, but this section is actually incredibly important. There are three core elements to this section: the reassertion or restatement of the thesis, the urgency or importance, and the takeaway. Having an excellent concluding section is the same as having an excellent ending for a novel or a film. Without one, you are left feeling empty, listless, or generally sad about the experience. However, with an excellent ending, you are given a vigor and excitement that will often bring your memories back again and again to that same experience. Therefore, crafting an excellent ending section to your writing is just as important as having a good hook or having a strong thesis. The restatement is not just a simple restatement. It's not just copying and pasting what you wrote before. It's not even just writing your thesis with different words. At the beginning of your writing, your reader had no idea of what you would introduce. By the end of the writing, you have instilled so much complexity and new ideas into the mind of your reader that most likely your reader's mind is buzzing with excitement and confusion. How does this work? What does that mean? How can I apply this? How are all these amazing ideas connected with one another? Your restatement of your thesis or your reassertion is a new kind of statement that can only be made in light of having all the knowledge of the previous writing. For example, if your thesis was to talk about the importance of halting the conversation to immediately head to the cafeteria, by the end of your paper, you would have introduced many new ideas into the minds of your readers. You might have introduced to them the scarcity of food in college cafeterias, the strange happenstance of finding love on sidewalks, or the need to remain empathetic, to learn how to sense the emotional needs of your roommates. By the end, you will have crafted a sensitive and invigorating piece of writing talking about the struggles of college students on campuses, problems with the food service, issues of finding soulmates, and lifelong relationships developed in university dormitories. The initial thesis statement of needing to stop a conversation early to make your way to the cafeteria will have transformed from something very simple to something very complex. Therefore, when you restate your thesis, you would, rather than talking about hunger, talk about the need to be cognizant and aware of your surroundings in college and to experience everything around you to the fullest, to embrace carpe diem as a mantra, or in English, this is translated as seize the day, and to carefully treasure the experience you have rather than letting the world pass you by. In the urgency or importance, you would then explore some evidence for the statement, provide some excellent examples of how students embracing college life has truly impacted their lives for good, or maybe introduce some warnings about college students who flew through the experience only to realize, sadly, what they had lost by not caring enough. Finally, you want to end your writing with a gift to your reader. This ending is similar to the hook. It could be a story that the reader takes away that fully illustrates what you are writing about. It could be a conclusion to the story you began in the hook, but applying the lessons of your points. It could be a poem the reader could remember. It could be a personal experience of yours to let the reader remember you as they close out this experience. It could be an invitation to a different way of thinking, a meditation on the virtues of your thesis, or an image of a life better lived when living out the points. Really, it's up to you how you end your writing, but the ending must be cathartic and resolved, and a way to finalize the moments with your reader in a way that your reader will remember for many months, if not years. Do that, and your writing will have succeeded in ways you have never dreamed. To sum up, the STAR is a very simple writing structure that allows you to easily outline a core set of concepts. Then, once you have those concepts on a page, you can easily expound upon them in creative and fascinating ways. I encourage you to think outside the box and be creative. Being creative is a muscle. Just like some people are born with big muscles, most people have to exercise in order to get into shape. And most people can get into shape. That means that while some people might be born creative, most people can exercise their minds and skills to become creative. But you have to take the time to think outside the box. Consider ideas that are not normal or common, and constantly challenge your own established ideas. If your only goal is to pursue the status quo, then you will never grow. But growth is necessary for creativity and expression.